there's a particular kind of pain that has no name in our everyday language. It's the pain of meeting someone who feels like coming home to a place you've never been, like remembering a dream you never had, like hearing a song that was written in a language only your bones understand. You know this pain. You're here because you've met them. The person who shouldn't make sense, but does. The person who lights up parts of you that you'd forgotten existed, or perhaps never knew were there at all. The person you absolutely devastatingly cannot be with. And tonight, sitting wherever you are in the quiet hours when the masks come off and the truth becomes unbearable, you're wondering why. Why would the universe be so cruel as to show you what love could feel like, only to place it forever out of reach? Why would fate introduce you to someone who feels like the answer to questions you didn't know you were asking, then write impossible between every line of your story together? Carl Jung would tell you, this is not cruelty. This is not randomness. This is your psyche speaking to you in the only language that could break through your defenses, the language of impossible love. What if I told you that this encounter, this person who has split your world open, was never an accident? What if Carl Jung was right when he suggested that nothing in our emotional lives happens randomly, that our psyche orchestrates meetings with surgical precision, sending us exactly the people we need to encounter for our soul's evolution? Not the people we want, not the people who will make life comfortable, but the people who will crack us open like a seed that must break before it can grow. The person you cannot have is not a mistake. They are not proof of cosmic injustice or evidence that you are unworthy of love. According to Jungian psychology, they are something far more profound. They are a messenger from the deepest parts of yourself, sent to retrieve pieces of your soul that you left behind somewhere along the way. Think about how you felt the first time you saw them. Not just attracted, not just interested. Something else. Something that bypassed your thinking mind entirely and went straight to a place in your chest that suddenly remembered how to breathe and ache at the same time, as if every cell in your body stood up and said, yes, this, finally. That recognition you felt wasn't about them. Not really. It was your own soul recognizing itself, seeing reflected back in another human being all the qualities, all the potential, all the unlived life that exists within you, but has been waiting in darkness for permission to emerge. Carl Jung called this projection, but not the shallow kind of projection we usually mean when we talk about seeing our flaws in others. This is sacred projection, the kind where we see our highest possibilities walking around in someone else's body, speaking with someone else's voice. Living the kind of life we secretly dream of, but have been too afraid to claim. The intensity of what you feel for this person, the way they seem to have taken up residence in your mind without paying rent, and the way you find yourself thinking about them at 3 in the morning when you should be sleeping. This is not weakness. This is not you being dramatic or too sensitive or unable to let go. This is your psyche screaming at you to pay attention. This is the collective unconscious using another human being as a teaching tool, as a mirror, as a map back to yourself. Before they appeared, you were probably living a half-life. Not unhappy necessarily. Maybe even content. You had your routines, your relationships, your reasons for getting up in the morning. You had convinced yourself that this was enough, that wanting more was greedy, that settling was the same as being mature. You had forgotten what it felt like to be truly alive. And then they walked into your world, and suddenly you remembered. Suddenly you understood the difference between existing and living, between going through the motions of intimacy and actually being seen, between safe love and the kind of love that transforms everything it touches. They didn't do this to you intentionally. They're not some spiritual sadist sent by the universe to torture you. They're just a person flawed and human like everyone else, But something about the specific constellation of their qualities, their energy, their way of being in the world has activated something dormant in your unconscious mind. This is what Carl Jung meant when he spoke about synchronicity. Not coincidence, not chance, but meaningful alignment. The universe doesn't randomly throw people into your path. According to Jung and spirituality teachings, there's an intelligence beneath the surface of reality, a pattern-making force that orchestrates encounters designed to wake us up, to push us toward wholeness, to force us into the next chapter of our becoming. You were ready for transformation, even if you didn't know it. Even if you would have said no if asked. Your soul had reached a threshold where staying the same was no longer possible, where the old life had exhausted its potential, where something new needed to be born. And so the universe sent you this person, not to give you a relationship, to give you a mirror, not to complete you, to shatter your illusions about yourself so something more real could emerge. In Jungian therapy, we talk about the Anima and animus. The Anima is the feminine aspect that lives in the unconscious of men. The animus is the masculine aspect that lives in the unconscious of women. But these concepts go deeper than gender. They represent the parts of ourselves we haven't yet integrated, the qualities we've disowned or never fully developed. When you meet someone you cannot be with, you are often meeting your own anima or animus walking around outside of you. You are meeting the person you would be if you had been brave enough to become yourself fully. If you had followed your passions instead of playing it safe. If you had listened to your intuition instead of your fear. Look at what draws you to this person. Really look. Make a list if you need to. Is it their confidence, their creativity? The way they seem so comfortable in their own skin? The way they pursue what they want without apologizing? The way they speak their truth even when it's uncomfortable? The way they love deeply and openly, despite the risk? Now ask yourself, where in your life have you been too afraid to be confident? Where have you suppressed your creativity because it felt too vulnerable? Where have you made yourself small to fit into spaces that were never meant for you? Where have you silenced your truth to keep the peace? Where have you protected yourself from love by never fully opening your heart? This person is not showing you what you lack. They are showing you what you've buried, what you've denied, what you've convinced yourself you could never be or have or deserve. The magnetic pull you feel toward them is actually your own soul calling you home. It's the unlived life inside of you demanding to be lived. It's every dream you've deferred, every desire you've dismissed, every part of yourself you've abandoned, all rising up at once and saying, remember who you are. Remember what you're capable of. Remember that you are allowed to want what you want and feel what you feel and be who you truly are. The reason this hurts so much is because you've been living at half capacity for so long that seeing someone embody the fullness you've been denying yourself feels like both salvation and damnation. They've shown you what's possible, and now you can never unsee it. Now you can never go back to pretending that small is safe, that invisible is acceptable, that half alive is enough. Carl Jung believed in synchronicity, the concept that meaningful coincidences are not coincidences at all, but evidence of the collective unconscious orchestrating our lives in service of psychological and spiritual growth. The universe doesn't randomly shuffle people into our paths. It sends us exactly who we need to meet exactly when we're ready to learn what they came to teach us, even when, especially when we think we're not ready, especially when the lesson comes wrapped in the kind of pain that makes us want to return it to sender. You met this person now because your soul reached a breaking point. You had gone as far as you could go, being the person you thought you had to be. You had exhausted the potential of your old way of living, your old way of loving, your old way of understanding yourself. You had hit the ceiling of your own self-imposed limitations. And your unconscious mind, in its infinite wisdom, sent you someone who would shatter that ceiling completely. Someone who would make staying small impossible. Someone who would love you, or almost love you, or show you what love could feel like, in a way that ruined you for anything less authentic ever again. This is not cruelty. This is initiation. This is your psyche saying you're ready for the next level, even though you don't feel ready. Especially because you don't feel ready. The person you cannot be with is the death of your old self walking towards you wearing a face you could fall in love with. They are the ending that must come before the beginning. They are the fire that burns away everything false so that something true can finally be born. There's another layer to this that most people miss. In archetypes in Jung, there's the concept of the wounded healer. The person who can only help others heal because they've descended into their own wounds first. This person you cannot have. They're activating the wounded healer within you. They're showing you that your capacity for deep feeling, for profound love, for soul-level connection isn't a weakness or a curse. It's your medicine. It's your gift. It's the very thing that will allow you to move through this world with authenticity and depth. But first, you have to feel the wound fully. You have to stop trying to logic your way around it or positive think your way through it. You have to let it break you open so that what's inside can finally come out. If you're still here, if you haven't run from what's being said, it means you're ready. Leave a heart if this is touching something real in you. You're not alone in this. Let's talk about what happened to you after you met them. Not just the surface story, the romantic narrative, the timeline of messages and moments. Let's talk about what happened to your soul. You started feeling things you had convinced yourself you were too damaged to feel, too old to feel, too realistic to feel. You started wanting things you had decided were not for people like you. You started imagining a version of your life that looked nothing like the one you had carefully constructed to keep yourself safe. And it terrified you. Because wanting is dangerous. Feeling deeply is dangerous. Loving without guarantee is dangerous. So you've spent years, maybe decades, building walls disguised as boundaries, calling numbness, peace, confusing resignation with wisdom. This person walked through all of it like your defenses were made of smoke. They didn't try to break down your walls. They simply existed in a way that made the walls irrelevant. And suddenly you remembered what it felt like before you learned to protect yourself. Before you learned that protection always comes at the cost of aliveness. In Shadow Self-Exploration, which is central to Jungian psychology, we talk about the parts of ourselves. We've disowned the aspects of our personality. We've pushed into darkness because they felt too vulnerable, too intense, too much. Your shadow isn't just your flaws and your darkness. Your shadow is also your light that you've been too afraid to shine. Your power that you've been too afraid to claim. Your desires that you've been too afraid to admit. This person has activated your shadow. All of it. The beautiful parts you've hidden because you learned that being too much gets you abandoned. The passionate parts you've suppressed because you learned that caring too deeply gets you hurt. The creative parts you've silenced because you learned that dreaming big gets you disappointed. When you're with them, or thinking about them, or replaying conversations with them in your mind at 2 a.m, you become a different version of yourself. More vibrant, more authentic, more alive. You say things you've never said. You think thoughts you've never allowed. You feel feelings you've spent years learning not to feel. This version of yourself terrifies you because it's so far from the person you've been showing the world. The person who has it together. The person who doesn't need too much. The person who is fine, always fine, totally fine. But Carl Jung would tell you that this wilder, more vulnerable, more intensely feeling version of yourself is not an aberration. It's who you actually are underneath all the protective layers. This person hasn't created something new in you. They've revealed what was always there waiting. There's a reason why this particular person and not someone else. In psychological types, Jung described how we each have a dominant function and an inferior function. The qualities that fascinate us most in others are often the expression of our own inferior function, and the parts of our psyche that are least developed, but hold the most potential for growth. If you're someone who lives primarily in your head, analytical and controlled, you might be drawn to someone wildly emotional and spontaneous. If you're someone who's always accommodating others, you might be magnetized by someone who's unapologetically self-directed. This isn't about opposites attracting. This is about your psyche showing you the next frontier of your own development. The awakening is often brutal, because once you've seen yourself capable of this depth of feeling, this intensity of connection, this level of presence, you can never go back to sleepwalking. You can never again pretend that surface-level relationships are satisfying. You can never again convince yourself that playing it safe is the same as being happy. You've been awakened from the collective trance, the trance that says real love is for other people, that deep connection is rare, that you should be grateful for whatever scraps of intimacy come your way. The trance that says wanting more is selfish, that feeling deeply is weakness, that being fully yourself is too risky. This person has shown you that you are capable of so much more than you've been allowing yourself. More passion, more authenticity, more courage, more joy, more love. Not because they gave these things to you, but because their presence in your life activated parts of your own psyche that have been dormant, waiting for permission to wake up. The reason this awakening hurts is because it comes with a devastating awareness. You can see clearly now how much of your life you've been living in accordance with other people's expectations. How many of your choices have been made from fear rather than love. How many years you've spent trying to be acceptable instead of honest. You can see all the times you made yourself smaller to make others comfortable. All the times you silenced your truth to avoid conflict. All the times you chose security over authenticity because you didn't believe you deserved both. All the times you settled for relationships that felt safe but empty because you didn't believe you were worthy of connections that felt alive. And now that you've tasted what it's like to be fully yourself with another person, even if that person can't be yours, even if that connection can't continue, you cannot unsee your own half-lived life. You cannot unknow what you now know about your capacity for depth, for feeling, for authentic connection. This is the crisis that Carl Jung described in the individuation process. The moment when you can no longer go back to unconscious living, but haven't yet learned how to move forward consciously. You're trapped between worlds, between who you've been and who you're being called to become. The person you cannot be with has initiated you into a new level of consciousness. And like all initiations, it feels like death. Because it is death. The death of your old identity. The death of your old stories about yourself. The death of your old ways of moving through the world. But here's what Jung knew that most people don't. Death is not the end. Death is transformation. The seed must die before the flower can bloom. The caterpillar must dissolve before the butterfly can emerge. Your old self must be destroyed before your true self can be born. The person who cannot be yours is here to midwife that transformation, not by staying, often especially by leaving, by being impossible, by breaking your heart so thoroughly that you can never put it back together the same way again. Because putting it back together the same way would mean going back to sleep. And your soul has tasted awakening now. There's no going back. In Carl Jung concepts, he spoke about the transcendent function, the psyche's ability to hold the tension between opposites, until a third thing emerges, something that transcends both. Right now, you're in that tension, between wanting them and knowing you can't have them, between who you were before and who you're becoming, between the pain of loss and the gift of awakening. Your work is not to resolve this tension prematurely, but to stay in it, to let it cook you, to let it transform you from the inside out. Right now, you're probably in the hardest part, the part where you're awake, but still wanting to go back to sleep because at least sleep didn't hurt this much. The part where you're aware of your own unlived life, but don't yet know how to live it. The part where you can see all the ways you've been hiding, but don't yet feel brave enough to be seen. You're in the void, the space between death and rebirth. And it feels like you're being torn apart. You are. That's the point. In dream analysis, Jung often talked about dreams where we're being chased or attacked are not nightmares in the traditional sense. They're the psyche's way of pursuing us, trying to integrate parts of ourselves we've been running from. The monster in the dream is often our own disowned power, our own unexpressed creativity, our own unlived life trying to catch up with us. This person is your waking dream. They're chasing you not to harm you, but to help you reclaim yourself. Every time you think of them, every time you ache for them, every time you wonder why you can't have them, your psyche is asking you to stop running, to stop hiding, to turn around and face what you've been afraid to feel, to want to be. The awakening is not complete until you understand that this was never about them. It was always about you, about your own journey back to yourself, about your own process of becoming whole. They were the catalyst, not the destination, the mirror, not the treasure, the key that unlocked the door, but you still have to walk through it alone. What makes this awakening so powerful, so undeniable, is that it doesn't just affect your ideas about yourself. It affects your body. You feel different in your skin when you think of them. You breathe differently. You move differently. You exist differently. This is somatic awakening, the kind that bypasses the rational mind and goes straight to the cellular level. Your body knows something your mind is still trying to argue against, that you are meant for more than you've been accepting. That aliveness is your birthright, that you don't have to earn the right to take up space and want what you want and be who you are. There's a place you go when you finally stop fighting the truth, when you stop pretending you're okay, when you stop trying to logic your way out of what you feel, when you finally surrender to the reality that you cannot have what you want, and no amount of manifesting or hoping or waiting is going to change that. Jung called this place the dark night of the soul. The mystics called it the via negativa, the way of negation. The hero's journey calls it the descent into the underworld. Every wisdom tradition has a name for this place, because every human being who has ever lived a conscious life has had to visit it. This is where you meet your shadow in full. Not just the shadow aspects this person activated in you, but all of it. Every wound you've been carrying, every story you've been telling yourself, every belief that's been running your life from the background, every way you've been betraying yourself while calling it self-care. In Jungian therapy, we don't try to avoid the descent. We don't try to positive think our way around it. We know that the only way out is through. We know that the treasure you're seeking, the wholeness you're longing for, the truth you're ready for, all of it is waiting for you at the bottom of the pit you're trying not to fall into. So let's fall together. Let's go all the way down into the depths of this sacred heartbreak and see what's really here. The first thing you find in the depths is your original wound. The first time you learned that love equals loss. The first time you learned that wanting something means not getting it. The first time you learned that being yourself means being rejected. The first time you learned that the world is not safe for your full expression. Maybe it was a parent who couldn't see you, a first love who left, a dream you shared that got laughed at, a risk you took that didn't work out. Something happened, probably many things happened, that taught you to protect yourself by hiding, by shrinking, by playing small. And you've been living from that wound ever since. Building your entire life around avoiding that original pain. Choosing relationships that felt safe even if they felt empty. Choosing careers that felt secure even if they felt soul-crushing. Choosing to be liked over being real, because at least being liked means not being alone. This person has ripped the bandage off that wound. They've shown you what it feels like to be fully seen and still wanted to be completely yourself, and still valued to show up authentically and still be met with love, even if you can only have this for a moment, even if you can never have it forever. And now that you know what you've been missing, the wound that you've been carefully managing for years is suddenly unbearable. Because you can't unsee the truth you've been living from your wound instead of living from your wholeness. You've been choosing safety over aliveness. You've been dying by inches while calling it self-preservation. This is what emotional healing actually looks like. Not affirmations and bath bombs, but facing the raw truth of how you've been abandoning yourself. How you've been choosing people who can't fully meet you because deep down you don't believe you deserve to be fully met. How you've been settling for less than what you truly want because wanting feels too dangerous, too vulnerable, too likely to end in disappointment. The second thing you find in the depths is rage. Not at this person though, you might feel that too. Rage at yourself, at all the years you wasted trying to be someone you weren't. At all the relationships you stayed in long after you knew they were wrong. At all the times you silenced your own voice to keep the peace. At all the dreams you abandoned because you didn't believe you were allowed to want what you wanted. You're angry that you waited this long to wake up. You're angry that it took another person to show you who you could be. You're angry that you gave away your power, your voice, your truth, and called it compromise. You're angry that you made yourself small and comfortable when you were always meant to be vast and wild and free. This rage is holy. Don't push it away. Don't shame yourself for feeling it. Carl Jung believed that psychological types include thinking and feeling functions. And most of us have been taught to privilege thinking over feeling to rationalize our emotions instead of experiencing them fully. But your rage is information. It's your soul telling you what it will no longer tolerate. The rage is what gives you the strength to change. To finally choose yourself, to finally honor your truth even when it's uncomfortable, to finally stop apologizing for taking up space, for having needs, for wanting more than you've been given. Let yourself feel it. Let yourself scream into pillows and punch walls and cry until your eyes are swollen. Let the rage move through you and burn away everything that's been holding you back from becoming who you are meant to be. But here's what you need to understand about this rage. It's not destructive. It's generative. In spiritual relationships work, we talk about how anger is often just grief with its armor on. Your rage is actually mourning. Mourning for the life you could have lived if you had chosen yourself sooner. Mourning for all the times you made yourself small when you were always meant to expand. Mourning for the person you might have been if you hadn't spent so long trying to be acceptable. This rage is sacred because it's refusing to let you go back to sleep. It's burning away the old agreements you made with yourself about what you're allowed to have, to be, to want. It's clearing space for something new to be born. The third thing you find in the depths is grief. Deep, ancient, primordial grief. Not just grief over losing this person, though, that's part of it. Grief over the life you've been living. Grief over all the years you spent asleep. Grief over all the moments of aliveness you missed because you were too afraid to be present. Grief over the person you could have been if you had been braver sooner. This grief has no bottom. You could cry for 1,000 years and still not exhaust it. Because you're not just grieving one loss. You're grieving every loss you've ever experienced and never fully processed. Every goodbye you pretended didn't hurt. Every ending you rationalized instead of feeling. every disappointment you stuffed down because you didn't have time to fall apart. You're grieving your innocence, your naivety, your hope that the world would be different than it is. You're grieving the fantasy of the life you could have had with this person, yes, but more than that, you're grieving the life you've been living without yourself. Carl Jung said that what you resist persists. The grief you've been avoiding your entire life has been growing in your unconscious, waiting for a moment when you finally felt safe enough, awake enough, brave enough to let it surface. This person has given you that moment, not by being with you, but by breaking you open. So grieve. Grieve fully. Grieve until there's nothing left to grieve. Grieve until you reach the bottom of the bottomless pit and find to your surprise that there's solid ground after all. There's something else down here in the depths that you might not expect. Alongside the wound and the rage and the grief, there's also relief. Relief that you finally get to stop pretending. Relief that you no longer have to perform the version of yourself that everyone found acceptable. Relief that the truth is finally out, even if it hurts, even if it's messy, even if it means everything has to change. This relief is a sign that you're on the right path. That breaking open was exactly what needed to happen. That you couldn't have continued living the way you were living without something in you dying permanently. The fourth thing you find in the depths is the truth. The truth you've been avoiding because it's easier to blame external circumstances than to take responsibility for your own life. The truth that you cannot be with this person, not just because of logistics or timing or other people or impossible circumstances. You cannot be with them because you are not yet the person who can sustain that kind of love. You are not yet whole enough to meet them as an equal. You are not yet integrated enough to show up in a relationship like that without losing yourself. The universe is not keeping you apart as punishment. The universe is keeping you apart as protection, as an opportunity, as a gift of time and space to do the work of becoming the person who is capable of the kind of love you glimpsed in their presence. This is the hardest truth to accept, because it means you have to stop being the victim of your own story. You have to stop waiting for them to rescue you, for circumstances to change, for the universe to finally give you what you deserve. You have to start taking responsibility for your own healing, your own growth, your own transformation. In Carl Jung concepts, this is called the individuation process. It's the journey of becoming a whole, integrated person. Not perfect, not fixed, not complete, but conscious, aware, awake to your own patterns, your own wounds, your own ways of protecting yourself that no longer serve you. This person appeared in your life because you were ready for individuation, even if you didn't know it. Even if you would have said no, if the universe had asked your permission first. You were ready to see yourself clearly, to face your shadow, to reclaim your disowned power, to integrate the parts of yourself you've been hiding. And individuation is not a comfortable process. It's not a gentle process. It's a process of death and rebirth, of breaking down and building back up, of losing everything you thought you knew about yourself, so you can discover who you actually are, underneath all the conditioning. The person you cannot be with is your initiator into this process. They've brought you to the threshold. They've shown you what's on the other side. But they cannot walk through the doorway with you. That journey you have to make alone. This is what you find at the bottom of the depths. Not them. You. The you you've been waiting to meet your entire life. The you who is brave enough to face the truth. The you who is strong enough to feel everything. The you who is whole enough to love without needing to possess. The you who is free enough to let go of what cannot stay without losing yourself in the process. And here's what nobody tells you about the depths. Once you've been down there, once you've met yourself in that place of absolute rawness, you're never the same. You can't go back to performing. You can't go back to pretending. You can't go back to living a life that's acceptable, but not true. The depths burn away everything that's not essential, and what remains is just you. Raw, real, ready. So now you're here. You've been torn apart. You've descended into the depths. You've met your wounds, your rage, your grief, your truth. You've seen clearly how you've been living and what needs to change. You've understood that this person was never meant to be yours, that they came to return you to yourself, not to complete you. Now comes the hardest part. The part where you have to actually change, where you have to take all of this painful awareness and transform it into embodied action, where you have to stop performing healing and start actually healing. In psychological connections, like the one you've experienced with this person, the temptation is to make them responsible for your transformation. To wait for them to come back so you can finally become who you're meant to be. To put your life on hold until you have them, because surely you can't grow without them, surely you can't be whole without them, surely you can't access these parts of yourself they activated without them being there to activate it. This is the final trap. The final test. The universe is asking you. Will you reclaim your own power, or will you continue to outsource it? Will you become the person they showed you that you could be? Or will you keep waiting for them to give you permission? Because here's what Jung understood about archetypes in Jung and the collective unconscious we all carry within us, the potential for wholeness. Not because someone gives it to us, but because it's our birthright. Every quality you saw in this person, every aspect of them that mesmerized you, every way of being, they embodied that felt so magnetic it's already inside you. Dormant, yes. Undeveloped, yes. But there, the work now is integration. Taking what was unconscious and making it conscious. Taking what was projected onto another person and reclaiming it as your own. Taking the mirror they held up and using it to see yourself truly for the first time. Let's do this practically. Let's make it real. Think about the specific qualities that drew you to this person. What were they? Their confidence, their creativity, their passion, their freedom, their ability to be vulnerable, their courage to live authentically. Now ask yourself, where in my life am I being called to develop these qualities? Where am I being asked to be more confident, more creative, more passionate, more free, more vulnerable, more courageous, more authentic? Not someday. Not when circumstances are perfect. Not when you've healed all your wounds and resolved all your issues and become a fully actualized human being. Now, today, in the life you're actually living, with the resources you actually have, in the body you actually inhabit. What would it look like to start expressing the passion you felt with them in your daily work? What would it look like to bring the vulnerability you showed them to your existing relationships? What would it look like to claim the confidence they reflected back to you in how you move through the world? This is where self-discovery gets real, not as an abstract concept or a spiritual ideal, but as concrete choices you make every single day. Do you speak up in that meeting or stay silent? Do you pursue that creative project that scares you or tell yourself you don't have time? Do you set that boundary or continue accommodating everyone else's needs while neglecting your own? This is spiritual relationships, work at its deepest level, not spirituality as bypassing or toxic positivity. Spirituality as the courage to become embodied, to bring the transcendent insights down into your actual human life and let them change how you eat breakfast, how you talk to your friends, how you show up at work, how you spend your Saturday mornings. Jung and spirituality are inseparable in this sense. He believed that psychological work is spiritual work, that individuation is a sacred journey, that becoming whole is the closest thing we have to a spiritual purpose. But it's not abstract. It's not theoretical. It's in the trenches of your daily choices. Every morning when you wake up, you have a choice. You can continue to live from your wound, from your fear, from the small, safe version of yourself that this person's presence exposed as insufficient. Or you can live from what they awakened in you. From the truth of your capacity for depth, for passion, for authentic connection. This doesn't mean you'll never think of them. It doesn't mean the ache will disappear overnight. It doesn't mean you have to be over them to move forward. It means you start treating this experience not as a tragedy, but as initiation. Not as a loss, but as an awakening. Not as something that happened to you, but as something that happened for you. You start asking different questions. Not, why did they leave? But, what did their presence reveal about who I'm meant to become? Not, how do I get them back? But, how do I honor what they showed me by actually becoming that person? Not, when will this stop hurting? But, what is this pain trying to teach me? In emotional healing, we talk a lot about self-love, but it's often presented as bubble baths and affirmations. Real self-love is keeping the promises you make to yourself. It's honoring your own needs, even when no one is watching. It's choosing what's true over what's comfortable. It's becoming your own primary relationship instead of abandoning yourself every time someone else enters your field. This person showed you what it feels like to be truly seen, truly met, truly valued. Now you get to practice giving that to yourself. Not as a consolation prize, as the main event, as the relationship that makes all other relationships possible. You practice seeing yourself without judgment. You practice meeting your own needs without shame. You practice valuing your own presence, your own voice, your own truth. You practice being as patient with yourself as you would be with them, as kind with yourself as you wanted them to be with you, as devoted to yourself as you were to the possibility of being with them. This is self-discovery at its rawest, not discovering that you're perfect or healed or ready, discovering that you're human, discovering that you're worthy, discovering that you contain multitudes, discovering that you're allowed to want what you want and feel what you feel and be who you are without apology. And slowly, incrementally, in ways you won't notice, until you look back months from now, you start to become the person they mirrored. Not because you're trying to win them back, not because you're hoping they'll notice, but because you finally understand that the person they showed you is not someone else. It's you. It's who you've always been underneath all the armor. The confidence yours, the passion yours, the depth yours, the capacity for profound love yours, the courage to be authentic yours, the freedom to live on your own terms yours. All of it, always yours. Just waiting for you to stop looking for it in someone else and claim it as your own. Here's what changes when you truly integrate what this person awakened in you. You stop looking for permission. You stop waiting for validation. You stop needing other people to affirm your worth before you believe it yourself. You start living from your center instead of from your edges. You start making choices based on what feels true instead of what feels safe. You start showing up in your life as the main character instead of the supporting cast in everyone else's story. This is what soulmates actually mean in the Jungian sense. Not someone who completes you, someone who shows you that you were never incomplete. They're a mirror that reflects your wholeness back to you so clearly that you can finally see it yourself. And once you see it, once you know it, you can never unknow it. You can never go back to treating yourself as less than whole. There will come a morning when you wake up and realize you haven't thought about them in hours, then days, then weeks. Not because you've forgotten them or stopped caring, but because you finally remembered yourself. You'll notice that you're making different choices now, braver choices, more honest choices, choices that honor who you're becoming instead of who you've been. You'll notice that you're speaking up when you used to stay silent, setting boundaries when you used to accommodate, pursuing dreams when you used to play it safe, being yourself when you used to perform. You'll notice that other people are responding to you differently. Not because you're trying to be different, but because you are different. You're more present, more alive, more real, and people can feel it. Some will be drawn to your new authenticity. Others will be threatened by it and pull away. You'll learn that this is information, not rejection. You'll notice that you're no longer waiting for your life to begin when circumstances are perfect. You're living now, fully, messily, imperfectly, but living, not performing, not pretending, not postponing. Living, and one day you'll think of them, and instead of that familiar ache, you'll feel something else. Gratitude. Not the kind of gratitude that's really just spiritual bypassing, not the toxic positivity that pretends pain wasn't real. Real gratitude. The kind that acknowledges that they broke you open, and that breaking open was exactly what you needed. You'll understand then what you couldn't understand before that. Why the universe sends you someone you can't be with is answered not through having them, but through becoming yourself. That love and separation are sometimes the same gift wrapped differently. That soulmates don't always mean forever. Sometimes they mean catalyst. Sometimes they mean mirror. Sometimes they mean the person who loved you enough to not stay, because staying would have kept you both small. Carl Jung spent his life studying how we become whole. And what he discovered is that wholeness is not about having everything we want. It's about integrating everything we are. The light and the shadow, the conscious and the unconscious, the lived life and the unlived life, the person we've been and the person we're becoming. The person you couldn't be with has been your greatest teacher in this process, not because they taught you about love, though they did, but because they taught you about yourself, about your capacity for depth, about your hunger for authenticity, about your willingness to feel everything even when it destroys you, about your courage to want what you want even when you can't have it. They taught you that you are not the small, safe, settled person you had convinced yourself you were. You are vast. You are wild. You are capable of loving so deeply that it changes your molecular structure. You are capable of feeling so intensely that it shatters your illusions about what life is for. You are capable of being so authentically yourself that it makes other people uncomfortable. And that's okay. That's perfect. That's exactly right. The transformation is not about becoming someone new. It's about becoming more fully who you've always been. It's about shedding the layers of protection and performance, and pretending until you're standing in your own truth, naked and afraid and exhilarated all at once. It's about learning to love yourself with the same intensity you felt for them, to see yourself with the same generous vision, to value yourself with the same devotion, to be as patient with your own becoming as you wanted them to be with your flaws. It's about understanding that unrequited love is often the universe's way of making sure you finally require yourself. That the love you thought you needed from them was actually the love you needed to give yourself. That the connection you sought externally can only be found internally. This is the final truth, the one that sets you free. You don't need them to be whole. You never did. You just needed them to show you what wholeness looks like so you could recognize it in yourself. They were the mirror, not the source. The catalyst, not the destination. The question, not the answer. The answer is you. It's always been you. The person you were seeking when you found them. The love you were looking for when they appeared. The wholeness you thought they represented. All of it is already inside you waiting. And now that you've done the work, now that you've descended into the depths and come back transformed, you're ready for a different kind of love. Not the kind that completes you or rescues you or gives you permission to be yourself. The kind that meets you as an equal. The kind that witnesses your wholeness without needing to fix you. The kind that adds to your life without defining it. You're ready for love that's not based on need or lack or projection, but on genuine seeing and genuine meeting and genuine choice. You're ready for partnership that challenges you to keep growing instead of letting you hide. You're ready for connection that feels like expansion instead of contraction, like freedom instead of prison, like coming home to yourself instead of losing yourself in someone else. And the most beautiful part, the person you couldn't be with has prepared you for this. They've stretched your capacity. They've shown you what's possible. They've initiated you into a new level of consciousness about love and relationships and what you're willing to accept. So when the right love comes, when the person appears who can actually be with you, who's available and ready and capable of meeting you in your wholeness, you'll recognize them. Not because they feel like that impossible person, but because you'll feel like yourself with them, fully, freely, without having to hide or perform or pretend. You'll recognize them because you won't be projecting your unlived life onto them. You'll have claimed that life for yourself. You'll have integrated those qualities. You'll have become the person you needed to become. And from that place of wholeness, you'll be able to love someone not because you need them to make you whole, but because you choose them from your wholeness. This is the transformation. This is the gift. This is why the universe sends you someone you can't be with. Not to torture you, not to teach you that love is impossible or that you're unworthy, but to wake you up, to break you open, to return you to yourself, to prepare you for a love that's real, not just imagined, available, not just dreamed about, grounded in truth, not just projection. The person you couldn't have was never the point. You were always the point. Your awakening, your healing, your becoming, your journey back to the truth of who you are when you stop abandoning yourself for people who can't stay. And now you know. Now you've become. Now you're ready. Not because you're perfect or healed or finished, but because you're conscious, because you're present, because you're willing to feel everything and still show up, because you've reclaimed your own power and integrated your own shadow and embodied your own truth. The love you were seeking outside yourself, you found inside yourself. And that changes everything. That makes all future love possible in a way it wasn't before. And that ensures you'll never again settle for anything less than the kind of connection that honors your wholeness. This is what Carl Jung knew. This is what the mystics taught. This is what your soul has been trying to tell you all along, and the person you cannot be with is leading you home. Not to them, to yourself. And once you arrive, once you finally come home to your own wholeness, you discover that you were never homeless at all. You were just looking in the wrong place. Welcome home. Welcome to the life you were always meant to live. Welcome to the love that was always yours to claim. Welcome to yourself finally, fully, completely. The journey isn't over, but you're no longer lost. You know the way now, and the way is you. If this resonated with something deep in your bones, if you felt seen in ways you've never felt seen before, leave a heart below. And if you're ready to stop abandoning yourself for people who can't stay, if you're ready to finally choose yourself, I'm here. We're all here, walking each other home.